topic of great interest, and I'm very pleased to be able to convene this meeting in partnership with our colleagues at the Lebanon Renaissance Foundation. The U.S. Lebanon Dialogue Program has been convening a series of meetings exploring various issues involving the U.S.-Lebanon relationship. And as we look at the multiplicity of issues, those issues frequently go back to one near and dear to my heart, and that is the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. In that regard, one always must look at the future of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. So it was with great privilege and honor that I have the opportunity to introduce Nicole Champagne, a friend and colleague, someone with whom I've worked for a long time. We have a little bit of an unusual format today, so I hope you will indulge us. Nicole is only able to join us for the first part of the meeting. She has on-the-record remarks and has asked that we not entertain Q&A with her today. She needs to leave early and go to a meeting, and I have agreed to that format because I think it's very important. Given the timeliness of issues involving Lebanon, as you know, everyone in this room obviously knows, Prime Minister of Lebanon was here this week, but by all accounts was a very important and successful visit to Washington. So, and following Nicole's remarks, she's agreed to stay to listen to the dialogue before she needs to leave to go back to the department for a meeting, and then we will have the opportunity to hear from our other colleagues, whom I will introduce again. But let me just briefly introduce them now, and we'll do so again. So we will also be joined by Nadim Shehadi, who will be presenting an overview of a paper he's working on involving Palestinian refugee issues in Lebanon, which we hope the Aspen Institute hopes to be able to publish later this summer. And my good friend and colleague, Gaethel Omri, who brings to the table enormous insights on this issue. I want to thank Gabe very much for joining us today, and Nadim for coming a great distance. So thank you both. Nicole, welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
It is a pleasure to be here. It's especially a pleasure to be here with Tony. As Tony said, I actually worked for her under the Clinton administration, so it's really a pleasure to be here with her. I want to start off by saying that there are two decisions the Obama administration made that have an impact on Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. The first was the decision to press for comprehensive peace from the get-go. So not just the Israeli-Palestinian track, but all sort of comprehensive peace, all tracks. And the second was the decision to assert explicitly that the U.S. does not support forced naturalization of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. As President Obama, Secretary Clinton, and Senator Mitchell have stressed repeatedly, the U.S. remains committed to the pursuit of a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. And we believe that achieving such comprehensive peace will further the U.S. goal of secure and stable Lebanon, that it will help Lebanon as a whole, including the Palestinian refugees living there. And as Senator Mitchell and other U.S. officials have also stated, and as I just mentioned, we will not support the forced naturalization of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. So our efforts on the Palestinian-Israeli track will not come at Lebanon's expense, and neither, for that matter, will our efforts to continue to engage with Syria. We see all of these efforts as complementary and mutually reinforcing, not as contradictory. Lebanon presents one of the most challenging environments for Palestinian refugees in the region. Representing approximately 10% of Lebanon's population, the registered Palestinian refugees in Lebanon do not enjoy social or civil rights, access to public schools, social services, or employment in over 50 trades and white-collar professions. As a result, the vast majority of Palestinian refugees living in Lebanon rely entirely on UNRWA as the sole provider of education, health, and relief and social services. The 12 official camps in Lebanon suffer from a lack of proper infrastructure, overcrowding, poverty, and unemployment, and are politically volatile. The 2007 Nahr al-Bared conflict, in which the Lebanese armed forces battled militant Fatah Islam fighters for 4 months, also highlighted the risk of extremists feeding off of this poverty. And that fighting in Nahr al-Bared displaced some 30,000 refugees. UNRWA estimates that the camp reconstruction, which began in June of 2009, will cost over $300 million. Reconstruction efforts have been slowed, however, by inadequate funding and bureaucratic hurdles, such as the identification of archaeological ruins and a pending lawsuit. Currently, reconstruction of Nahr al-Bared in northern Lebanon is a priority for both UNRWA and the government of Lebanon, and the U.S. has been actively supporting that reconstruction and seeking contributions from other donors. The U.S., as many of you may already know, is UNRWA's largest bilateral donor. In 2009, the U.S. provided over $267 million to UNRWA, including $30 million to support the relief and reconstruction of the Nahr al-Bared camp. This month, the U.S. contributed $20 million to support Nahr al-Bared. $18 million of this contribution will go towards the reconstruction, and the remaining $2 million will provide assistance to the most vulnerable of the displaced by supplying food, health care, shelter, access to basic education, and improved water and sanitation services while the camp is being reconstructed. With this $20 million, the U.S. will have provided over $115 million to UNRWA in 2010, including $60 million for the general fund, which supports core services for the 4.7 million refugees in the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And that includes providing education for nearly 500,000 Palestinian refugee children in 691 UNRWA schools. Over the last 3 years, the United States has responded generously to UNRWA's emergency appeals for Nahr al-Bared relief and reconstruction. With our 2010 contribution, we will have provided over $91 million to Nahr al-Bared relief and reconstruction since 2007. It's encouraging to see the reconstruction making progress, to see the new homes going up, and knowing that before the end of the year, families will be able to move back into the camp. But there are many challenges that still lie ahead. Continuing cooperation between UNRWA, the government of Lebanon, the Palestinian refugee community, and donors is of the utmost importance to ensure the success of this massive humanitarian undertaking. And we appreciate that this process is complex and requires patience and perseverance, and we remain fully committed to supporting this crucial endeavor. We also continue to support the work of the Lebanese-Palestinian Dialogue community, established in 2005 and currently headed by Lebanese attorney Maya Ghassan Majdoub. I'd like to talk now about the security concerns. In addition to having concerns about adequate donor funding and improving the rights and the living conditions of refugees, the U.S. remains concerned about significant militant activity inside the camps. The summer 2007 fighting between Lebanese armed forces and militants from Fatah al-Islam destroyed the Nahr al-Bared camp and displaced 30,000 residents, as I mentioned earlier. Steady progress on the camp's reconstruction and support of relief services for displaced population are critical, not just for the humanitarian well-being of this population, but from our perspective for regional stability. Recent interfactional conflicts in Ain al-Hilwa and other camps, as well as the radical infiltration that resulted in the destruction of Nahr al-Bared, underscore the need to address security concerns in Lebanon's Palestinian refugee camps and to ensure the safety of UN staff. The U.S. is funding in this regard a community policing program under an agreement with Lebanon, with the construction of a police station for the internal security forces included in the reconstruction planning for the Nahr al-Bared camp. Nahr al-Bared will become a model for U.S.-sponsored projects are designed to help reduce tensions within the camps and to help the Lebanese government become more secure.
Nicole, thank you very much. Very interesting overview, and you've given us a lot to discuss further. And I appreciate your staying here to listen to the conversation. So allow me now to introduce Nadim Shehadi, who is, as I said earlier, an Aspen Institute visiting fellow, author of a upcoming paper on the future of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. Has already produced a paper in 2009 published by Chatham House, and our colleague Gaith El Omri, Advocacy Director of the American Task Force on Palestine. So Nadim, I'd like you to use this opportunity to give us a bit of an overview and summary of the paper that you're working on, if you would, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to try and simplify what is a complex situation in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? That's the idea. Okay. Now, the problem with a complex situation is that it evolves into too many interdependent equations and variables, and then it becomes unsolvable. It becomes like a tangled web that that nobody really controls. So too many people are trying to weave something, but in the end, the end result is not the product of one of the players, and it's not under the control of any single one of the players. So, if we look at this, we have the Palestinian refugee situation. We have several players in this game. We have several, say, stakeholders, concerned parties. There are definitely clear objectives to achieve, which are part of Lebanese policy, which the United States supports on this. And there is a series of dilemmas or problems. Some of them are easy to solve. These are the ones that you can quantify, that are tangible. You can open a road or do infrastructure or that. The most difficult problems to resolve are the intangible ones, because they're difficult to measure and they block situations. I'm going to give you a small example of a very simple problem, a discussion in Nahr al-Bared refugee camp between the designers of the project. The Lebanese government was present, UNRWA was present, and there were, of course, Palestinian refugee representatives present. And it was about the consultation about the width of a staircase. So there was a staircase which was supposed to be 90 centimeters, and some staircases were 85. So now this problem quickly became a problem of representation about the consultation. Who of the Palestinians can be consulted? I mean, if the designers say we've consulted Palestinians, so who have you consulted? Have you consulted the NGOs? Have you consulted the armed factions? Have you consulted? So who has the legitimacy? So questioning the width of the staircase is questioning the legitimacy of the consultation and the consultation process. Now, when you question the legitimacy of representation, you're also questioning the whole problem of camp governance. Who controls the camp? Who has the power? Who represents the people? Are the popular committees representative of that? And of course, when you question that, you question the whole relations between the PLO, Fatah, the pro-Syrian factions, and it boils down to the legitimacy of the PLO versus the radical factions. But that also means you're questioning the legitimacy of the whole peace process, because that peace process is affecting you. It's affecting your right of return. It's affecting your welfare. So it escalates to that. Then you go into Iranian-U.S. rivalry very quickly from there. You go into very conceptual issues like whether you should solve your problems through armed resistance or through negotiations. And if you want to solve them through negotiations, do you have confidence in the international community, in the UN, in whether they can deliver or not on I mean, there are also blockages on a very micro level. I mean, like two officials who don't like each other. It could boil to that. Now, this is on the Palestinian side, but there's also even further complications on the Lebanese side. What does the army have to say in this? What does the government have to say in this? Who leads the process? What's the relationship between the PLO and the Lebanese government? Who does the Lebanese government recognize and talk to on so in the end, also, it's a zero-sum game in a nutshell between a new order, which Nicole described, which is a model that's being created in Nahr al-Bared in the reconstruction of the camp, a model which includes very tangible aspects like new buildings and more air and space and all that, but also includes a lot of intangible issues. So, that in a nutshell tells you how complicated an issue can become. But in the end, it's also basically about 5 centimeters of a design of a staircase. So how do you square this? I mean, many of you are familiar with such a scenario because this is how the world used to run in the days of the Cold War. You could have a small village squabble which could escalate into superpower rivalry, or a small local election, or that. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that this is not unique to a political situation, like the refugee camp or the reconstruction of the refugee camp, or however complex is the Lebanese-Palestinian relations. It's a relationship which has been going on for 60 years with lots of conflicts and very tragic events, but it's also a large part of the history of the two people, so it's very deep-rooted. Now, such a complex web can evolve in a board meeting, say at McDonald's Corporation, if they're discussing the shape of a lettuce that you put in a Big Mac, could quickly become a conflict between marketing and promotion people, and between the nutritionists and the art production, and it can easily escalate into much bigger issues. Now, very quickly, you can reduce this image to something like a very tangled web. And if you look at the back of your paper, you'll see it. Now, this is not meant to be representative, but I will explain to you what it is. It's you basically have the stakeholders, which are the international and regional players, the Palestinians, the Lebanese. You have the issues like civil rights, arms outside the camp, arms inside the camp, the reconstruction of NBC. In the middle of this, you have the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is what is at the back of everybody's mind, and something that they cannot control, which is what is going to be the outcome of the peace process for that. So this is an external variable, but which is present in every one of the equations or the variable, because people are always worried whether any action will affect the prospects or the desirable outcome in the peace process. And the way to, there are also many dilemmas involved in these relationships. So all these lines represent equations which are relationships between these variables. And some of them are tangible, some of them are not. And just to give you an example of that, I mean, some of the dilemmas are whether you need resistance or negotiations, whether anything has a relationship with the tawteen or permanent settlement of the refugees, whether you have faith in the Middle East peace process. Again, it's all these issues that come up during the discussion over the staircase. Now, how do you resolve this? My view is that it's not resolvable. You cannot. None of the players here has all the elements in their hand to resolve a situation. Even collaboration between them is difficult on that. The way to resolve it is to is to be able to establish through deep knowledge of the situation what are the relationships between these variables, what are the dilemmas, which ones can be isolated, and then you will have an independent variable which is under the control of one party, and you can resolve it. I'm going to very quickly give you a very simple example, just to finish off. Say we want to give Palestinians civil rights. Say in Lebanon, we want to give a qualified nurse the right to give tender, loving care to her patients in a legal fashion. No. There are so many issues involved in that. One of the issues is when Palestinians and Lebanese are negotiating on this, do they include a trade-off between arms and rights? Is it part of one package, or are rights non-negotiable? You should not really give anything in return. This sounds like a simple question, but it's quite a complicated one in a context like this. Do you give the rights unilaterally or part of a package? Does facilitating the work of Palestinian refugees in the country facilitate also or lead to the issue of permanent settlement, which both the Palestinians and the Lebanese reject? Do you give rights in a piecemeal fashion, or do you give rights in a wholesale manner? So all these questions are part of that web, and they are connected to bigger parts of the. So, for example, if you're dealing with the right of work in a package deal with the arms, then you get into the other dilemma, which is resistance versus negotiations. If you're taking away the arms, giving right of work becomes a trick to dislodge the resistance operation. It becomes an issue of the negotiations camp, the Saudis, the Abu Mazen, Ghaith al-Amari, and people versus Hamas, Syria, Iran, and then China by extension, and it quickly becomes relevant to the situation in Georgia, to the missiles in Europe, to some Trans-Caucasian pipeline. It's endless. So in order to resolve it, you need to be able to isolate it. And I was sitting with my friend Charles Adwan here, who's from the World Bank, and we were trying to figure out how to represent this. And this is not what he recommended. What he recommended is something that was beyond my capacity to represent. But basically, if you can, you need to have different shapes and different colors and different arrows and some glowing, some for that to see how you can dissociate these variables from each other. For example, if you establish that a Palestinian who has a PhD, who teaches at MIT and has an American nationality and a boat in Nantucket Harbor and all that, still has the same political rights, the right of return and the right of compensation and all that, as a poor refugee living in a refugee camp in Ramallah or in Lebanon, which is a fact. Then you're dissociating one of these dilemmas, whether improvement in conditions constitutes permanent settlement or constitute loss of opportunities in the peace process. It sounds simple to us sitting here, but it is very deep-rooted. The experience of UNRWA when they were reconstructing Jenin, for example, was that the refugees were resisting the reconstruction at the quality of that reconstruction because it looked like permanent settlement. It looked like this was giving up their right. The same thing happened in Nayrab near Aleppo, the camp near Aleppo. So all these dilemmas sound simple, but they and a lot, especially the conceptual ones, are very deep-rooted, so you need to dissociate elements, disentangle every thread of that web, and once you can undo, when you undo one, it gradually becomes easier in that sense. Now, where is all this leading? I mean, what can the United States do on
very
this?
good point.
Sounds too confusing to create a policy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the United States and the international community and the UN can contribute a lot, especially to the intangible aspects. $500 million of aid is useless sometimes if it does not convey the message of confidence in the international community, confidence in the peace process, confidence in... it's more like local anesthetic, if you like. So it has to convey convey confidence in the peace process, confidence in international protection, confidence in that nobody's being sold down the river, making a deal behind their back. These are the issues that I mean, if you have two people sitting in Ramallah arguing whether you need a peace process or whether you need an armed resistance, the fact that Abu Mazen negotiated for 12 years about prisoners and was never able to release a single prisoner, and that Hezbollah and Hamas were able to release hundreds by terrorist operations and by kidnapping soldiers and launching wars, speaks a lot. No amount of local anesthetic will change the mind. This contributes to an intangible argument that basically you cannot have faith in negotiations. You have to restore faith in negotiations. If you have a peace, if you have an attack like in July 2006 on Lebanon, and for 35 days the international community, the UN, the US, the Arab League, and all that could not stop the attack, it does decrease the faith in international protection. It does increase the need for arms. All these intangible aspects are so when when refugees are sitting in camps for 60 years worried about their right of return, they need to have faith in the peace process. A new clinic will not give them faith in the peace process. I think that's where, because the main issue here in the middle is related to the peace process, related for the refugees, it's related to, and for the Lebanese, related to the issue of permanent settlement. This is where the contribution is most meaningful in tipping the balance between a zero-sum game, between two orders. One, an old order which created conflict and destruction for 60 years, but is very resilient, and one which is shyly trying to establish itself, but is very weak. And I think it needs the confidence element is as important as the aid element.
Thank you, Nadim. Gabe, before I recognize you, I'm going to exercise the privilege of the chair. And given my background on the Arab-Israeli front, I'd like to make a couple of observations. I think your point is very well taken in terms of the importance of restoring trust. But I think it's also very important to reflect on a couple of key points. This administration has skin in this game, and more so than any other administration, and even the administration of which I was intimately a part. President Clinton made enormous inroads together with the Palestinians in partnership. And I think that needs to be reflected, and it's very important. Secondly, with regard to the context of trust and reflecting on Prime Minister Hariri's statements this week, Nicole laid out for us, I think, something that is very important, and that was immediately after shortly after Senator Mitchell's announcement as Special Middle East Peace Envoy. He traveled to Lebanon. He made it, which was a very important gesture, reflecting that this president believes in a comprehensive end to the Arab-Israeli conflict, and not only believes but is intending to act on that, and reflects also the tool that he has that, frankly, we did not have in the 90s, and that is the Arab Peace Initiative. I think it's an important aspect that I would like to see, as Secretary Clinton, in her words when she was at Doha, realize the Arab Peace Initiative in today's world and begin to add more content to that initiative. But as Nicole just mentioned, that we will not impose a forced resettlement in Lebanon of Palestinian refugees. It's a very important statement, and it's a statement that I feel compelled to draw attention to, and we'll have a lot of opportunity for Q&A, but Gaith, may I ask you to turn it over to you for some comments.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance, first of all, to share a podium with an old friend, Nadim, from my days in England. I'm going to start with a few disclaimers. First of all, I obviously don't speak for the PA or the PLO or any official Palestinian body. I'm a former in this regard. Nor do I speak for ATFP, my organization, which as a matter of policy does not take positions on the substance of permanent status issues. I will speak as an expert, as someone who was involved in the negotiation part of the refugee issue, to some extent with the Palestinian political issues as well. And finally, my last disclaimer is I do not claim to understand anything about Lebanon. It is so complicated. So with these in mind...
That is refreshing.
Yeah. And I had the pleasure of actually reading a draft of the paper beforehand, and I'll be referring to it to a large extent. And I do believe that the paper succeeds in doing what it set out to do, which is basically identify and map the various strands and the various levels that affect the refugees in Lebanon, that issue. And I think Nadim made a very good presentation of how complex this is. And I think the paper goes a step further and starts exploring some of the ways of dealing with some of these, or disentangling this particular web. I strongly agree with the premise that was present throughout the paper, namely that there needs to be a delinking between the issue of civil, social, humanitarian issues and the wider issues. And this is both as a matter of principle. I mean, legal limbo in which the refugees in Lebanon find themselves, as well as humanitarian implications of this, are simply unacceptable on a human rights perspective. But also as a practical matter, even if by some miracle tomorrow we were going to have an agreement, it will take a long time to implement the refugees agreement. It will take years, and it's unacceptable and untenable for the refugees to continue living in the way they are living for all that period. So there is a necessity to start disentangling these issues and start presenting the issues of civil, social rights as separate from the wider political issues of permanent status agreement. Don't hold it hostage to it. And as Nadim said, ultimately a refugee has rights by virtue of being a refugee. And their social and wealth status does not affect that. I believe from my conversations with the Palestinian leadership, at the highest level of the PLO leadership, they understand this, they agree with this. The problem, obviously, which I will get back to, is many of these positions and beliefs at the leadership level do not trickle down to the actual on-the-ground committees, what have you, on the refugee camps, for reasons that were mentioned in the paper, and I will visit again. The only concern, the only slight concern I have about the paper, sometimes it seems to imply that the Palestinian refugees are at the root cause of Lebanese problem. I think that's overstating the case. Obviously, they are very much a part of the complexity and have contributed to the instability in many ways, but there are other issues that are unrelated to the Palestinian refugees which are inherent to Lebanon itself. And I think it does these issues this service to kind of mask them under this, sweep them under this rug. I will talk about two issues when it comes to the Palestinian approach to refugees in Lebanon. I will talk about how the PLO has dealt with the refugees and the camps and what have you. I will do this very briefly. And I will talk a bit about how the PLO dealt with the issue of resolving the refugee issue in negotiations, both in general and specifically when it comes to the Lebanese refugees. I must start by saying that I think all Palestinian factions, whether it's Fatah, whether it's Hamas, whether it's the other small factions, understand the volatility of the situation in Lebanon. And it's not a coincidence that during the coup in Gaza, which you mentioned in your paper, and in other instances, this was not exported to the camps. There's an understanding that if the camps go in arms again, go up in an internal Palestinian fight, this will have spillover effects into Lebanon that are very risky, and I think this is an understanding shared throughout the political spectrum among the Palestinians. The paper rightly said that the PLO/Fatah control and access to the camps has been diminished for many reasons, not least of which the way the PLO exited Lebanon. It was not a way that the Lebanese people were very happy with, and everything that built up to it. Syria has been very much part of this in terms of fomenting its own proxies and clients and trying to control the camps. The PLO, when it established the Palestinian Authority after Oslo, turned most of its energy, talent, resources into building its new structures. Control over population and territory is power in political terms, and this is what occupied the Palestinian Authority and the PLO for most of the time. And finally, the Fatah movement itself, which was going through very serious internal dysfunction, continues to, but was incapable, I think, of exerting its own control over the camps, and many of the Fatah dysfunctions were being played inside the camps in Lebanon. Recently, and as an outside observer, I can see some encouraging moves from the PLO to try to rectify some of these issues, particularly with the appointment of a high-level envoy into a Palestinian envoy, PLO envoy to Lebanon, which shows direct involvement and direct investment in the issue, as well as recently after the Fatah Convention, a change of some of the military and other leadership of the PLO in Lebanon. To what extent this will be effective in the long term, I'm not sure. But I do believe that at the end of the day, this cannot move as long as Syria continues to act the way it acts vis-a-vis the rejectionist groups, the camps, the armed camps outside the camps, the training camps that they have out there. And I think, and this is maybe not the topic of this discussion, but Syria has gotten very comfortable with misbehaving and having others pay for it. And I think it's very important on this issue and other issues for this country to start taking this more seriously. This, though, leads to, because of this absence of the PLO and the PA and Fatah from the camps, this has led to a lack of consultation on many issues, including the peace process. And you mentioned this in the paper, the need to consult the refugees on the peace process. I say this is important not only for the refugees, this is something that PLO has to do across the board. But when it comes to engaging the refugees, I would say there has to be two caveats. The first caveat is that refugees cannot be engaged only on the refugee issue. They have to be engaged on the whole deal. Ultimately, as I will mention later, the refugee issue is the issue where most compromises will be made by the Palestinian negotiators. And the peace deal will be sold as a package. And I think the approach to the refugees should be a package approach and discuss with them the whole peace process and re-engage them on this one. And the other issue, the other caveat is formal consultation with the refugees is also very difficult. It might be easiest in Lebanon, but if you look at somewhere like Syria, engaging the refugees means engaging the mukhabarat, Syrian mukhabarat. Talk about Jordan. Engaging the refugees means opening a hornet's nest in terms of Jordan's stability and character. So there are major pitfalls. That said, I do believe that the PLO has to start approaching its public in many ways, mass communication and otherwise, to start preparing them for the compromises that need to be made in any real deal in the future. From a negotiation perspective, the refugee issue, as Nadim rightly says in his paper, is at the epicenter in some ways of the peace process, particularly on the narrative, intangible side of it. How it deals with history, how it deals with the root causes of the conflict. However, as I mentioned earlier, ironically or not, it is the area where probably from a negotiation perspective, most of the compromise will be made. There is very small room for maneuver when it comes to territory or Jerusalem or what have you, but on refugees, this is one issue that I think everyone who's been involved in the negotiations knows there will be compromise. And if you look at the resolution, and actually this is not something that only the PLO recognizes, if you look at the Arab Peace Initiative, it talks about a just and agreed upon resolution to the refugee problem. Yeah. And agreed upon, by definition, means that there is a sense of compromise. For the PLO, there are three components. For the Palestinian negotiators, there are three components of refugee resolution. The first is return. And return is really two issues. There is the intangible, the way it interlinks with narrative, with history, with responsibility, with all of these kind of issues. And this, I would claim, is the kind of issue that will not be resolved until the very last minute. This is the card that we will not know. And I actually believe the negotiators themselves will not know where they stand on until the last minute and they see the package. The practical implications, though, in terms of physical return, I think anyone who's been involved in the negotiation knows that if there is going to be any physical return to Israel, it will be at best minimal. This is, I think, the bitter pill that the Palestinians will have to swallow when it comes to accepting a deal. Unfortunately, the leadership has not prepared the public for it, but everyone knows that this is a deal breaker when it comes to a peace deal. Alternative to the right of return to Israel, obviously there are the other options, Palestinian state, third country resettlement, but also the issue of settlement in the host country. And because, as Palestinian negotiators, we knew the sensitivity specifically when it comes to Lebanon, but to other countries. As a drafter, I was always instructed when I drafted positions to say, first you went to the sovereign discretion of the host country. There is an understanding that tawteen, that settlement, cannot be imposed on the host countries, and it can lead the host countries to actually destroy the peace process or a deal if they feel that they are being pushed in that corner. So there is clarity that any deal on refugees will have to be, any deal on settling refugees will have to be pursuant to the sovereign discretion of the countries involved. The negotiations, and of course the third part of the package will be compensation, which is not problematic for refugees in Lebanon. Now, in all of these aspects, and I remember as a negotiator, I was also always instructed to add a paragraph saying priority in all of these solutions will be given to Lebanon. This is the Palestinian position, whether it was Arafat, whether it's Abu Mazen, whether it's everyone else. They understand that the potential for violence and for a spillover in Lebanon could destabilize the whole region. And they are, I think, go out of their way to signify publicly and privately that there is no desire or interest to settle people in Lebanon, nor is there a desire or interest to or there is a desire and intention to resolve the Lebanese refugees issues at the first instance of the peace deal. Now, one of the problems we faced as negotiators, and you touched upon in the paper, is how do you have, in a bilateral deal, in a bilateral agreement, how do you deal with the representation of other countries which have stake in it? And particularly on the refugee issue, you look at a country like Lebanon, there will be three areas which will affect Lebanon directly. One, which I mentioned, the issue of settlement in host countries. Another one is the issue of compensation for host countries. And this is a position I think that has been advocated by the PLO and by other Arab countries, Of course, the PLO cannot speak for other countries when it comes to that. And finally, when you have an international mechanism for implementing something like this, how does it work on the ground? How does the function on the ground, and how does it relate to UNRWA, which is another complication. Now, the difficulty with this issue is, from a negotiation perspective, you cannot have all of these parties on the table. Simply, you cannot. It's complicated enough as it is. You don't want to start getting in the other ones. Instead, however, two things have to be done, and I think some of them are already being done. One is ongoing briefings on the various levels. And when I was a negotiator, I must say there were no briefings with the Lebanese government on this issue. We were engaged in an ongoing and I think continuous, very detailed discussion with the Jordanians on this one. With the Lebanese, there wasn't at that time because the relations did not allow for this kind of a discussion. I don't know what the situation is right now. I hope this has changed. Because ultimately, there has to be synchronization as we build towards a deal. And of course, after you have a deal, there has to be a formal conference or contact to formalize these issues that touch upon third parties. In conclusion, I would say the issue of refugees in Lebanon, their civil human rights, are not ones that have to wait and can be linked or be held hostage to political negotiations. This will leave them languishing as they are for a long time. I think we have to move beyond that, and this requires everyone to make difficult decisions, including the Lebanese, and have to start dealing with this and disentangling it from the other Lebanese concerns and not playing Lebanese problems on this particular issue when it needs to. I do believe that this paper is a very valuable addition, both in putting some of these issues forward publicly and in terms of disentangling these issues, and I'm really looking forward to the debate that it's going to generate once it's published. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicole, I think before we begin Q&A, I don't want to keep you. I want to thank you very much for joining us and taking the time to be with us, and hope you'll come back again soon. Thank you. So let me open the floor for Q&A. I think all three of our panelists have given us a lot to reflect upon, and I'm sure there will be a lot of Q&A. I'd like to pick up, though, on this issue of Gaith and Nadim on the practicalities of the compensation and the international mechanism. I know you're not going to be surprised. And how you see that in the short-term and long-term. Nicole laid out for us a very interesting construct in terms of what the U.S. government's doing on their reconstruction effort, and her comment that we have entered into a partnership with the Lebanese to have a new security model. So I'd like you both to address those three aspects. The security piece, and Gaith, you did address Syria, but as you look at the security relationship of the camps and the humanitarian issue, but then flashing forward in the context of a peace agreement, how do you execute a compensation package for the host government? In this case, let's look at the Lebanon in particular. And an international mechanism dealing with 12 camps and the complexities of those camps. So, please.
We're laughing because there's someone in the room who knows much more.
Yes, I know. I'm hoping that you'll enter into the conversation with us as well. So please, let me ask you both to comment, and then we'll open up to questions.
Okay. Well, again, to simplify things to irrelevance almost, the very bottom line in the peace process, when it comes to the refugee issue, is that the refugees should not lose more than they have already lost as a result of the peace process. This sounds a bit absurd because you're expecting justice and all that, but there is potential for the refugees to lose more than they have already lost because of the peace process. And they have already done that. The peace process has already disadvantaged the refugees. They have not gained anything from it yet. They have lost a lot of welfare aspects, very tangible welfare aspects. If you think of the withdrawal of the PLO as part of that, the PLO withdrew from Lebanon overnight with 10,000 pensions cut off, 65% of the Palestinian population was employed by the PLO, and it was all cut off. The institutions were closed down, and it was a cold turkey stomach. So one has to be aware that they should not lose more than they have. And there's a lot of potential of them losing more through the implementation process because of very intangible elements. Because if there is no adequate preparation with the host countries and with the refugees, if there is no management of expectations, then you could face very negative reactions that will make the refugees worse off. We are already witnessing negative reactions. I mean, Jordan, for example, started taking away passports and making life difficult for refugees from the West Bank coming to Jordan and going back, in anticipation of any possible deal. In fact, the refugees' life becomes more difficult when there is a potential for a deal because there is this anticipation from all sides. If you do not have control over something that is of vital importance to you, and I disagree that it's vital importance only to Lebanon. It's even more vital for Jordan. Jordan could disappear off the map. Lebanon, it's a minor issue for us. So if you have no control over something, it is only rational to build in an anticipation of a worst-case scenario and to start preparing for a worst-case scenario. It's not irrational behavior in that sense. And that is what we will see if there is no adequate preparation for and expectation management in terms of the on the political side. And if I may point out the presence of Rula Rifai here, with whom we work on these matters. And at Chatham House, we also have a project of which is in coordination with IDRC, which is specifically to consult with the stakeholders about possibilities of implementation. Now, on the security matter, if I may, just a couple of minutes. On security issues, the volatility of the situation in Lebanon, and the specificity of the Lebanese situation. I think the specificity of the Lebanese situation is slightly misdescribed. The specificity of the Lebanese situation is not because it's volatile. It is because that is where Palestinian political society is present. The Palestinian political society in all its components, Hamas, Fatah, PLO, pro-Syrian, anti-Syrian, civil society, expats, locals, whatever, with a freedom of expression, with freedom of political mobilization, even freedom of carrying arms and fighting amongst each other, is only in Lebanon. In Syria, you do not have that variety. In Jordan, you certainly don't have that variety or that possibility. Even in the PA, you do not have that variety. And this is something that is a characteristic of that the Palestinians have acquired from the Lebanese, in a sense, because in Lebanon we are also as varied, and you will find that in every Sunday family lunch you will have political discussions, and you will have you will enter a meeting like this in Beirut. You will find the representative of Hamas, representative of the PLO. They are there as a matter of course. It's not a big deal for them to be in the same in the same room. So the importance of the Lebanese case is that if you cannot sell a deal in Lebanon, you cannot sell it anywhere. Of course, there will not be any reaction in Syria because nobody can have a reaction in Syria. There will not be a reaction in Jordan because they can't, and it will be controlled possibly in other places. But it is the place where Palestinian political society is there at its most varied and most active. Another point on security issues, specifically with Syria, and also in relation to security, whether the Palestinians are responsible for all the ills of Lebanon. I think the best way of describing it is that the Palestinians are that 5 centimeter in the staircase in Nahr al-Bared, because the issue of the Palestinian presence in Lebanon managed to explode all the contradiction in it. So in the end, the focus comes on it. But it is the Lebanese. If you cure the Palestinian situation in Lebanon, you're curing all the ills of Lebanon at the same time. So it is in a sense the width of the Lebanese staircase is the Palestinian presence and this is why it's very important to fix the situation, to get it into an acceptable mode, because in the same time you will be curing 30 years of accumulated Lebanese ills that include the civil war, that include Syrian control and all that. Now, the last point, which was mentioned on engagement with Syria and on the Syrian component, which I didn't mention this.
I mentioned it. I take responsibility for mentioning it.
The third point on that, engagement with Syria is very important in the way it passes intangible messages also. That to signify to how much they can get away with, or what is acceptable to the international community. I'll give you one small example. I won't take long. For example, the issue of arms outside the camps. If you ask any Palestinian in Lebanon, these are not Syrian Palestinian arms. They are considered as regular Syrian troops and under the control of Syrian mukhabarat, and there as a legacy of Syrian presence, a kind of a Trojan horse. And that's where a lot of the arms get smuggled, a lot of the terrorists to Nahr al-Bared got smuggled, and a lot of the arms to Nahr al-Bared got smuggled. Palestinians of Nahr al-Bared are innocent of Fatah al-Islam and all that. So in the discussion over arms of Nahr al-Bared, of the camps, outside the camps, was part of the Saudi-Syrian rapprochement. It was one of the items. The Saudis didn't get a single concession out of this. Maybe they got some promises. It was part of American Syrian discussions. They also did not get anything on it. In the end, there were promises, and on the day that Prime Minister Saad Hariri went to Damascus, there was a delegation from the PFL-PGC who came from Damascus to Beirut just as he was like almost crossing the border, and visited Hezbollah and made a declaration saying that their arms are not on the table for any questioning, and that anybody who questions their arms is an Israeli Zionist agent against the Arab cause and for Tawtin and for the whole thing. That was a huge slap in the face to the Saudis, to the Americans, to the Prime Minister Hariri as he was getting into Damascus and all that. So letting the Syrians get away with things like this is literally letting them get away with murder, because there is a lot of murder committed in that sector. I'll leave that.
Yeah. This is probably where my ignorance of Lebanon would be most obvious. But if I look at the security situation inside the refugee camps, just again as an outside observer, it is just, I don't understand how they can function as areas where there is no exercise of Lebanese security sovereignty. This is simply not sustainable, and I believe that, you talked about how Palestinians in Lebanon are like Lebanese in terms of the diversity, and I think in some ways it is like the Lebanese in terms of how the presence of arms in political life stifles this rich diversity. And I think as long as we have this arms in the camps, it's very hard for the civil society to come across, and you see it in the refugee committees and what have you, which are very much controlled by the old regime, if you wish. Something has to be done about it, and unfortunately nothing can be done about it unless you have political will from the various parties, be it the PLO Fatah, which means that Fatah in Ramallah has to exert its control on Fatah in Lebanon. Syria has to be part of this, and it's very hard to imagine why Syria at this moment would want to do that. So as much as this is something that needs to be resolved, I'm just not sure how it can be resolved at this moment. In terms of the compensation for host countries, there are different models for doing this. One model of doing it is, which some countries were advocating, which basically said you pay us a lump sum for every refugee because we fed them and clothed them and what have you. I don't think this is going to fly for many reasons. The more practical model, in my view, is to include it all in a kind of post-conflict reconstruction approach to the whole region, rehabilitating the refugee camps, all of these kind of issues of which get very built in with the refugee resettlement, and as such would also benefit the host countries at the end of the day. How will the mechanism work? That's probably the most difficult issues that I remember we and the Israelis, when we used to negotiate, we had many disagreements on this issue, not ideologically. There isn't a model out there that is most successful. It is a huge operation. You talked about the 12 camps. In some ways, these are the easiest. When you talk about the much more dispersed diaspora, how do you go to that one? In issues of compensation, how do you deal with it? In issues of prioritization of return or the various options. Definitions. It's a very, very complicated issue, but ultimately, and it will have to be a huge lumbering beast in some ways. The thinking, I think, conceptually has often been, from the Palestinian side at least, is as the implementation continues, many of the assets of UNRWA get used in managing and running this, and ultimately, when things are, when the deal is fully implemented, you will have UNRWA basically becoming this organization and then disbanding soon after that. But there's a lot of resources that one can use from UNRWA, and there's a lot of comparative experience, but this is a very complicated thing that, frankly, in my view now, having negotiated it for a while, it should not be left to the negotiators. It should be left to experts who will staff this particular mission. One thing that I would say here is, though, irrespective of what it's going to look like, one thing that's very important, all of the stakeholders, host countries, members of the conflict, donors, or what have you, have to have a representation in the governing body or something like this, to have ownership and to have input and to basically resolve some of the issues internally and not have this spill out as an external conflict.
I agree with you. I think it's
if
very
I may just
important.
add one thing to this. Complicated as it is, that process will take time. It will take between 10 and 15 years.
Easily.
And here, the most important element in this is the element of faith in the process. Because if there is faith in the process, it can take 20 and 30 years. If there is no faith in the process, it will break down, and the peace process will break down in 1 year. So the intangible element here, again, needs a lot of preparation. And if the Palestinian refugees feel that they're being sold down the river, they're losing more than they had before, it will not succeed.
That's a point well taken. Firas.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks to both our speakers. A point that both of you stressed is the importance of decoupling the rights issue, the rights of these refugees, from the other complicated political issues that might take years to resolve. As much as I agree with you on a moral level, being a follower of Lebanese politics, I know that this issue has been on the table for years and does not make any progress, because every time it's put on the table, if it's by Walid Jumlat or it's by Prime Minister Hariri or anybody else, there will always be somebody who wants to exploit it for internal Lebanese political reasons by saying this is the first step towards naturalization. So it seems to me, for us all to be practical in terms of our policy recommendations here, we need to think about what this restoration of Palestinian rights need to come with in terms of assurances to some Lebanese in particular. The only thing that I could think of is perhaps restoration of Lebanese sovereignty over these camps. Nahr al-Bared might be a good example. When Nicole was here, she spoke about Nahr al-Bared now becoming a model. But the issue with Nahr al-Bared is that it's particular to Nahr al-Bared. It took the destruction of the camp for us to rebuild the new order there. I'm not too sure about how likely it is for that to be to replicate itself in Helwe or in Bedewi or in some of the other camps. So I'm looking to get your thoughts about how we could be more practical about giving these refugees the rights that they're reserved, but also giving the Lebanese some assurances. Thanks.
Gabe, do you want to start?
This is really where I'm not an expert. I cannot say. This all is very, as you rightly said, it's very linked into the Lebanese and very ever-changing Lebanese political system and alliances and what have you. I mean, I think it's up to the Lebanese themselves to figure out what are the assurances that they need in this regard. I know what external powers can give as assurances. I know what the PLO can give as an assurance. And the PLO needs to be probably more vocal in addressing Lebanon and Lebanese public when it comes to that. Nicole did mention about the American position, which needs to be restated. You can get as many external guarantees as you want, but if some of the internal players in Lebanon wish to continue to exploit this, then there is nothing you can do about it. It's because they're not being exploited for their own sake. Obviously, they're a proxy for something else that's being discussed.
That's fair enough. Nadim.
Okay. Now, decoupling the rights from the security aspects. Basically, if you don't do that, you have no chance of solving either the rights or the security aspects, because the negotiations now are being done with the armed factions. I mean, the representatives of the Palestinian refugees are the PLO and the Hamas and all that, and they are the ones with the arms. And if they are going to negotiate with you their own disarmament, they will not. You will not reach it's impossible to reach a. Whereas on the contrary, if you give unilateral, if the rights are granted unilaterally without negotiations, because they are not negotiable, they are inalienable rights, which this is one of the favorite Palestinian words, but very few Palestinians can pronounce it.
Myself included.
Inalienable rights. And you do it because it's your duty, because you are the country of human rights, after all, and all that, and freedom. And then you are strengthening your position vis-a-vis the armed factions. They cannot use the quid pro quo of rights and say, yes, give the population rights, and then we will disarm, or then how do you? So you're strengthening your position in a more difficult situation. Now, as Ghaith said, the arms issue is much more difficult, because the arms issue is linked to Syria, to Saudi Arabia, to Iran, to Korea, to everything. Chavez's deal with the Chinese, everything is linked to the arms issue. So in your diagram here, you need to and this is thanks to my friend Charles Adwan, who spent 4 hours yesterday trying to explain to me how to do this, but I didn't manage to do it. But in your diagram here, you have to manage. You have all these types of variables. You have the variables which you have control over. You have the variables that are linked. You have the variables that are completely outside the system, like Tautin, which nobody has control over. So, in your diagram here, you have to work on every single relationship and try and delink the matters. Delinking the arms from the rights is an easy matter. It is an intangible argument, but I think that Lebanon is ready for it in terms of public opinion, in terms of discourse, except that because it is seen as a package, it's impossible to progress on it.
So, Nadim, I'm going to, time is kind of getting away from us. George, I'll get back. Can I recognize, please?
Thank you. I'm Charles Adwan, Nadim's friend.
Since you were referred to so many times, I didn't feel I needed to introduce you.
I had to, I think, step in. No, but I would like to go back a little bit to qualify Nadim's recommendation in the first part, at the end of his presentation, because it may have come across as being critical of this or any other administration, or of the peace process and the role of the U.S. in it, and I think it's important to highlight, and based on what he was what he was explaining to me yesterday, that his point is that the peace process and negotiations and whatever efforts that are being done are very important, and they should continue, and people trust them or believe them in a way. But from the perspective of delinking, within the frame of mind that in that example that he was giving of making sure that we can get at least the civil rights, the rights to the Palestinians, one needs to delink at least two equations or two variables in that equation. And that is basically delinking the perception of the Lebanese of the way this peace process is going and its impact on them from the issue of the civil rights given to the Palestinians. And it is true that the U.S. administration, and this is where the recommendation is, it is true that the U.S. administration in meetings such as this one does repeatedly highlight the fact that it will not be compromising on the Lebanese interests or dealing with them or allowing the peace process to be at their expense. As Ghaith was saying, in fact, there is actually a lot, some conviction that that this peace process will be at the expense of the Lebanese in general by the public, and Lebanese demagogues, political demagogues, have been helping with that.
We have a few.
Exactly. So basically, what Nadim was suggesting is that the peace process not only will be taken seriously, and I think he thinks that it is, but that issue of highlighting this lack of not allowing the Lebanese to pay the price should be done in a better way, in the sense that it may not be enough for a State Department official to assure a group of experts that the U.S. position is such, but also making sure that no other, intangible messages are sent to the Lebanese public, making them be suspicious of this whole peace process. And that alone would allow this delinking of the naturalization of Palestinians in Lebanon from the issue of their rights. And such messages could be, for instance, from Israeli leaderships, emphasizing day in, day out that there would be no resettlement of Palestinians or there would be no return of Palestinians back to Israel, or there would not be a return. And I think the role of the international community, not only the U.S., would be in sort of, assuring the Lebanese that no matter how it happens, it will not be at your expense, and that would delink, in their mind.
I take the point. I also think, though, that it is why it is incumbent on the Arab Peace Initiative to become more operational. It is to begin to add content into what is a very profound document, to make it live and real, can also provide some degree of assurance and complement what's happening now as the administration is laying out and ushering, at the moment, proximity talks, and what hopefully will be expanded not only in moving to direct talks, but in moving towards a comprehensive peace. So I take your point, but would like to also reflect on a previous point that I made. But George, you wanted to offer a comment or a question?
Yes, I have my name is George Hishmi. I'm just curious whether the two gentlemen have done any comparison between whether you have done any comparison between the refugee issue and other refugee issues in the world. And what I have in mind really is how were European Jews treated, and especially German Jews. Were they allowed to get compensation for everything? Were they had the right of return? Do they still carry two passports, German and Israeli or whatever? And how does this would apply in your assessment of what could happen to the Palestinians? One point that I grew up in Lebanon, best years of my life, is I always found it very strange that Palestinian refugees could not work in Lebanon. How do you expect them to support themselves? UNRWA cannot support all the refugees. It is an issue that is still dominant in Lebanon, the treatment of refugees. Thank you.
Dave?
I can start on this. I mean, in terms of other refugee issues, I mean, there is a uniqueness to the Palestinian refugee issue from a legal conceptual perspective. In that other refugee issues are dealt with something called the 51 Convention, which gives refugees political rights, certain political rights and civil rights. Interestingly, it was actually the Arab states that asked when the 51 Convention was created for the Palestinians not to be included in this convention, basically because of the kind of paranoia that rights mean tawtir. So in a sense, conceptually, it's a very different, even in terms of legal rules, in terms of organizational structures, UNRWA versus HCR. So there is a lot, and in this sense, there is not much of a comparison with some of the others from a legal political perspective, and of course, the kind of protracted nature of the. I'll get to that in a second. In terms of, I mean, the specific question you said in terms of post-World War II issues, I don't know the details, but I think there's one thing that is, one factor that's very important is after World War II, there was a state that was established, which was seen as the homeland of the Jewish people. And as such, a lot of the issues could be dealt with through creating the political address for many of the Jewish refugees who chose to go and exercise their rights somewhere else. Compensation, obviously, it's there and it's ongoing, and we hear about it and read about it all the time. But in many ways, because of the political nature of the Palestinian issue, because of the diplomatic nature of the Palestinian issue, it has become sui generis in terms of the legal, political. There's a lot we can learn about in terms of the social and migration patterns and what have you when we come to a solution, but getting to a solution cannot really base too much in precedent and in comparative work. You have to come up with a very specific, very unique solution.
Right of return? Right of return?
It's not, they cannot compare it to any other legal instrument in international law.
Why?
Because it's a different legal structure.
Yeah, but there is a legal instrument. I mean, there is I mean, it's the articles on state succession, the rights of individual state succession. But that's an individual right.
It's an individual right,
and it's not passed
it's
yet.
also, is there a state, was there no state? I mean, there are many issues that come in here as legal issues.
Bilal?
Let me inject some pessimism into a very optimistic discussion.
Really? I wasn't
I'm sorry that
detecting,
we-
yeah, exactly. I
That
must be
was-
listening to a different conversation. Be careful how you frame your comment.
Absent a de-linking of the issues and an isolation of the variables, which I think all of us agree that is essential to resolving this problem. What can the Lebanese do? Are we still in the containment phase? Echoing the practical question that Firas asked.
Thank you. That's a nice way. Let me also, I'm afraid we have, this is a very rich conversation, and because of the lateness of the time, I wanted, we'll have to conclude after this question, but I want to assure everyone this was the beginning of laying out the draft of this paper and taking into account the interest in this topic, that we will be exploring this further in several other roundtable conversations. So I apologize that we may not have been able to call on everyone and answer everyone's questions, but I hope you will join us again for additional conversations on this topic, and especially, Nadim, when your paper is ready for publication. But please, I think that is a very important question, the issue of Lebanon. What can Lebanon do?
Well, I think it's very misrepresentative to present the situation, to present this as a Lebanese versus Palestinian problem.
Exactly.
The divisions within the Lebanese society are quite complex, but the divisions within Palestinian society are as complex in terms of, and in fact they are on the same fault lines. So you have, and politically the Palestinian resistance and the Lebanese resistance are on the same side, and the Lebanese sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, peace camp or the
Pro-Western.
The pro-Western and Fatah are on the same camp. So the division is more ideological, and it's not a Lebanese-Palestinian division.
That's not what I implied.
Yeah, I know. So, but what I'm saying
There's a role
is,
for the Lebanese to play.
of course, but I just wanted an excuse to make that point.
It's really unfortunate because we had major questioning of the premises, of the policies, and of the assumptions, and I think in a healthy dialogue,
Okay,
it
well-
would have helped. I mean,
Okay.
You have to buy me a beer.
well, you know.
Well, Malcolm, go ahead. But I think
it's,
I want to get back on the issue of what Bilal said, but I want to turn it into the positive.
Yeah.
We have a new dynamic. There's a new government in Lebanon. Let's talk about how Lebanon today, what's Lebanon's role? Prime Minister Hariri, we laid out in his visit here re-engaging on the national dialogue. He talked about operationalizing the demarcation committee with Syria. It touches on the security issue. So play it out in the context of what Lebanon and Lebanon's central government might be able to do to address the issue of Palestinians.
But in the case of, I think you have to look at developments within Lebanese society rather than within the Lebanese what the government can do. One of the important developments in Lebanese society since 2005 is that everything is back on the drawing board. It's a society that's going through a very complex and deep re-evaluation of itself. It's not a unique thing that happens in Lebanon. It happened in the United States after the Civil War. It happened in France after 1870, in Germany after the Second World War. It's a process where after a shock like this, when you wake up from a coma or a long period, you get into it. And that's why many of the taboos were broken, including the Palestinian issue. It was hardly mentioned before. Syrian presence was hardly mentioned before 2005. So it's a new period led more by civil society, by intellectuals, by political parties, and that than by the government. The government is trying, the government itself is in paralysis because it includes all the contradictions in it, and it's not really leading the process. And this is the good news about this, because if there was no new perception of the problems within society, a very efficient government with a very clear policy cannot execute it. What you have now is within Lebanese society a reawakening with new perceptions of a lot of the old problems, and what we need is the government to catch up with that, and that's easier to do than the other way around. So all these taboos that were broken after 2005, after the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri, and all these demonstrations and all these, it's not just March 14 or it's everybody. I mean, the whole country was on. Whether you were for or against, it was the same process that involved the whole country. And if we had more time, I would give you examples of where this happened in other places, including the United States.
But Melon had a comment and question, so please.
No, first I'd like to thank Firas and the speakers for enlightening us with their perspectives. And it reminds me of an anecdote for those of us who were involved in the Oslo process, when we were told, and rightly so at the time, we're still very naive and honest, where we were told it's like somebody who wants brain surgery and you're focusing on his hand. We never understood that. But now if you look at the situation, and here I'm talking about as a concerned Lebanese American, is the title is the future of Lebanon, and here the future of our country is being discussed, and there is no representative of Lebanon. Second, yeah, in the sense giving the floor. Of course, Carla is our representative, but I'm talking about, and I'm not criticizing. I'm talking to friends and colleagues. The second point is, I think it is misleading, and I say that as a scholar, to focus on micro issues